I'm Matt Casey. I'm the Associate Director of Graduate Career Services. So I have the pleasure of working across AS&E and the School of Fine Arts, helping graduate students figure out what's next, how to go get it and make it work. So my background is a little bit similar. 7 years in career services across 3 different schools. I've taught at this level. I've been an executive recruiter for a year, so I have some experience of what it's like from the employer side and hired to find talent. I've also hired students across a number of platforms before, so I think it's gone through this process. So I think we're hoping to bring our experience and insights to bear in a meaningful hour at a time. So we just want to illuminate as a starting point for all of you who are part of this presentation. I think it's important to remember from a career services point of view, the value that you want to contribute is that career planning may feel nebulous, but the reality is career planning is most definitely a process. And everybody falls along this process or this continuum at any given time. All we want to state today is that wherever you may be in that process, and if you know or you don't, our team, Career Services, is here to support you with tools and resources, connections, and advice to navigate this place. But today's conversation is about happy things happening, is that you have, or very most likely, are going to receive an offer for a professional opportunity. And that could be a job, that could be an internship in my case, it could be a fellowship, there could be a lot of conditions. But this is talking about the fact that an employer is desiring you, and what do you do next?
So there are lots of different things that you can negotiate. Those of you that read really fast saw that, but we're curious. Those of you that didn't read fast and blinked, what are some of the things that you can negotiate? Team Zoom, you're welcome to shout it out. I think if you shout it out, we might be able to hear you. Team Local, you can just shout it out because you can't text us. So what are some of the things that you think you know negotiate? Salaries. I was going to say the same thing. Salaries. Do we get assumed salaries? So ultimately, salaries are always the first thing. Did you know that there's a lot more that you can negotiate than just salaries? Benefits. And benefits is a really broad word, right? So it could mean like lots of things. It could mean vacation time. It could mean insurance costs. It could mean retirement plans. It could mean all the stuff they give you that isn't necessarily money. So there's a lot of different things that can be negotiated. You can negotiate on salary, which we touched on. You can negotiate on benefits, we touched on that. 401k, your retirement plan. You can negotiate on where you're going to relocate. You can negotiate on signing bonus. That's more money. There's that. But there's also training and professional development. There's different travel perks. There's lots of different things that you can negotiate that are beyond just the straight up, which is what we usually think about first and is actually the most common thing.
It's becoming even more important now because what we've seen sort of in the negotiation. One big change that's happened in the current marketplace is that the first time in history, this was about a year ago, millennials have passed baby boomers as the largest working population in the country. And what that means is that for a lot of the millennials have different priorities and preferences. So salary compensation, I think for a lot of people are very heavily involved, but I think many of you might agree is that there are other things that you're interested in. Flexibility, access, it could be time off, could be sabbaticals, it could be flexibility. Things that maybe existed before, but I think are becoming much more commonplace and much more part of the equation and to some degree expected.
I mean, I've had folks that have said, I want to change my vacation, not the fact that you're going to give me 4 weeks, that's magical, but I want to take 3 weeks contiguous because my family's on the other side of Europe and I want to go visit them. And I can't do that for a long weekend. So I need to negotiate in the fact that I can take contiguous vacation. So there are different things that we figure out what's important for you, just as Matt's talking about.
Yeah, I've had a few folks that I've worked with and a close friend of mine. One asked to work a half a year, 179 days. One was in Mexico. So just for, and another friend of mine spends 6 weeks and negotiates this into the jobs, 6 weeks every year, a family vacation, he'll work remotely, and is just doing it across the world. Now, a lot of this is reminding ourselves of the inventiveness of this. So this is not limited access. It's your own creativity and who you talk to or what things you read online are all potential data points you can consider when you're thinking about negotiating an offer.
The list goes on and on. So while it's lots of different things from your title to benefits to start date, I know you're like, start date? Like, that's really a negotiation thing. Well, yeah, maybe they want you to start June 1st, but you want to start September. That's part of the conversation. So there's all of these different pieces, and you will likely not negotiate all of them with one employer, because they're gonna be like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Because if you're like, I want this, and I want this, and I want this, and I want the company helicopter, and yeah, it ain't now. Like the answer is now no. So now that we know the answer is no, let's either move on or back up. But thinking about what's important is really key. And our job here in this moment is to try to expand your minds a little bit beyond just straight salary. Even though you probably will talk about salary when the time comes. And actually, our example is going to be that because it's the most common thing that we deal with. But to expand your mind sometimes, because you might decide salary, I want X, but I can't get X. So maybe a grouping of Y is going to be my best answer. We always call it a BAP. Your best alternative to negotiated agreement.
You know, one thing I think is interesting in this too is like emerging trends. Like this has been trying to figure out for a while. Now companies and organizations, for instance, are providing school loan reimbursement as part of compensation. So separate. So salary, bonuses, etc. But based on a certain period of time that it negotiated, and there's different companies in different ways, is that they will pay off your existing loans over a period of time. So I think, again, this is where I think industry and organizations are trying to figure out how do we really nuance and make it attractive? Because right now it's a very attractive hiring market. It's evolving a little bit. So organizations are trying to be as creative as possible to source you as talent. They're looking for tough skills. We know that. So the reality is we want to make sure you're armed with all the tools you have to get what you, not only what you need, but what you deserve and what you have available to you. And I'm going to make one more point on this one because I made a note for it. Is one thing that comes up when in hiring, I don't know if you've heard of it, is sort of accelerated performance. So the idea is, we'll get to this, something we might talk a little bit more later. The idea is that before you've negotiated your job or in the process of negotiating your job, maybe you're not getting some of the things you want, like salary. This idea of accelerated review is that instead of waiting a year or whatever the marketplace is for performance review, you can do it in an accelerated amount. This is something you'll see. People will talk about it. I just want to make sure that this particular point is important. I think it's a really hard thing to negotiate on, this one particular piece, because the idea in structure is that maybe you feel like you deserve this, but they're offering you a little bit less. But if I improve myself for a certain period of time, they'll give you that number. But I think the idea of a 3 or 6 month review is not a lot of time to show performance of the job you haven't done. So I know this is a very specific example before we get into broader strokes, but this particular one I think is interesting because it comes up a lot if you feel like you're not getting the compensation that you want.
Right, because I mean, I always joke, like in the first 3 months, you figure out what happens. Think about your first 3 months on campus, right? When you came in as first years. Those of you that are first years, you just experienced it. Those of you that are seniors or grad students, you experienced it a while back. I always say, yeah, it took you 3 months to find out. And whether you work hard or work or, you know, right? So that's kind of the idea.
So I think this is the ideas that we talked about, that both of you mentioned it, that salary is the most dominant part of the discussion when we were thinking about negotiation. How much am I going to get paid? How much am I going to get in my paycheck every week that I can spend of salary? So here is an example of a starting point of a salary or an idea of that. With the idea being, the scenario is if this is a new PA, it could be anybody. Any new potential employee gets an offer for $85,000 for their first job in this space. They're so happy they got the job offer. They eat more ramen, have more flexibility, excited, larger number than they expected, and they accept without negotiating. So here's a number, roll to death. Scenario 2 is same job, same role, same qualifications for the candidates that they're seeking, except the second candidate decides to negotiate and gets a final salary offer of $4,000.
So what are your initial thoughts? Any reaction to them? If you were one of those people, how would you?
Well, I feel that I got like off a little, but what I am wondering is like, are we assuming that nothing?
Nope. They're exactly equal in terms of their skill set. That's not possible. But that's what we're thinking about in this kind of thought process. Yeah, I think all of us could very easily be that first individual, Joan, who didn't choose to negotiate at all. So one of the things that we hear a lot of times is, if I negotiate, is that going to be seen as the thing? So you put yourself in their position for a moment and said, if I was Joan, I could see myself doing that. And if I were Joan, I could maybe be upset if I knew that there was a Linda. And I would imagine if you put yourself in Linda's shoes, you're like, yeah. So, okay, so we got cool. So now I want you to flip the script. Put yourself in the employer's position. What do you think the employer thinks? How do they feel? Or where their mind is going at all?
I would feel that as an employer, I would think that really understands her like qualifications for job.
So you actually are saying that a negotiation is making you feel more positive about Linda. That's exactly the opposite of what we always hear, is that the employer is going to be upset with me for negotiating. Whereas you're saying, Linda seems like a go-getter. I dig that. And you're not wrong. There are folks that will think exactly that. So one of the things that Matt and I want to do today is we want to talk about this from each of the perspectives. Matt gets to play the employee that everybody pulls for. I get to play employer that everybody's like, really? So there's some things that we're thinking about on the employment side or on the employer side. What we're thinking about is that not every dollar is created equal. So we are thinking about the fact that more initial salary dollars is not just $4,000. Because you're thinking to yourself, okay, this is a multi-million-dollar company, no, $1 billion company. $4 grand to them is nothing. Well, there's a lot of things that we think about as the employer. One is that, yes, $4,000. Cool. Do you remember those first couple of slides where we showed you all those different things you can negotiate? Well, some of those benefits, disability benefit, life insurance benefit, your 401k match, if there is one, all of those are driven off of your base salary. So if your base salary is higher, all of those things are more expensive to me as an employer. So that $4,000 just cost me more money. You don't see workers' comp insurance. I pay it. Higher base salary, costs me more. Unemployment insurance. Should you end up unemployed, then you can claim benefits. I have to pay it based on your base salary. That costs me more. Those are things you never see, but as an employer, we're thinking about that. The other thing that we're thinking about is Joan is not the only person to get an $85,000 offer. So if I suddenly put you in at $104,000, which is where you want to be, I've now blown up my entire range. Because I have a range for each salary. And I want to put you in usually the lower third. Not because I don't like you, because that gives me the opportunity to give you big raises, should you do well. You want to get into the top third, which is great, but guess what? When you crush it your first year, I can't give you a raise to bump you out of that range until you get a promotion. You're not ready for a promotion. So now I give you a small raise and you're upset. Those are all the things that I'm thinking about when I'm saying, can I give you $4,000? Now, I'm not saying feel bad for the company. You shouldn't. But if you understand you, Matt is going to help with, and you understand the employer, which we now have a situation where you know how the game is played. You know how the game is played, and then you know the rules. And if you know the rules, you can then use those rules. I'd say to your advantage. That sounds too extreme, like you're taking advantage of someone. But you're playing the best you can. If you ever played a board game, you follow the rules. You play the best you can, and you're trying to make it. So that's the idea. So that's what we're thinking.
I think Chris made a good point. Like, it's not personal. But the person, from the individual standpoint, I think the idea is two things are happening. There is the organization that has this pool of money, right? So the idea is that this is this big entity, and a lot of these compensation and additional benefits, they cost money. In an organization, there's a role. That means there's somebody or some entity in the organization that has a perceived value or need, and they want somebody who can create value, and they're willing to compensate. And then the goal from your side is you, as an individual, have something to contribute, you're going to get paid for. And that's the negotiation relationship. So the idea is that the hiring manager, the person that is budgeted, they have this much money potentially available, the range Chris was talking about. They have this much money to go. When you're negotiating on salary, that's a lot of those pieces where the conversation is had. So there are benefits that you can negotiate on. And we'll get into some of those pieces. Like, it is very, very difficult to negotiate your healthcare benefits. There's a portfolio package because, interestingly enough, employers are negotiating with healthcare insurance companies to get the best value. So, but the things you can, so things we're talking about, the gas, you can have the salary is one of those big things. So what they do have a wage. So the idea is, by just accepting the offer, that is saying, I have assumed that that's my perceived value for this job. It means maybe you've done your research, maybe you've gone to PayScale or gone to a labor market statistics place, or maybe you've gone to Glassdoor, maybe you come to the Career Center and look at one of our NACE salary guides. And you're like, well, wait a minute, like, based on my experience going to Tufts and saying this piece and having this much experience in these areas, I think I might be worth more. So the idea is that when you start thinking about this, that extra money is that this is how I think I am valued. And the other piece of this is that, I think Chris alluded to this before. Negotiation is not personal, or never should be, and is an expectation that you will negotiate. Okay? So the idea is that one of the fears that I always had is that I would negotiate, and I would ask for a number that was outside this range that I wasn't aware of. And that would offend my future boss. Right? So the idea is like, well, they're offering 85 and I think I'm worth 120. And they're like, that's outside the range, then it's personal. It's not. The idea is that, we'll talk about some transparency in a second, but then you're in a situation like that dollar range is information about you where you think you are adding value to that organization. You need to speak to those pieces. So then the idea is, as an individual, well, why do you care? Like, why does that actually matter? Like when it gets very, very practical. What is, in this case, what is an extra $4,000 in salary? So what Chris said is that one person's making 85, one person's making 89. But let's say over time, things change. So this is just a chart to show the variance over time. So you could have Joan making 85, she got the offer, but she didn't negotiate. Then you've got Linda that said, I am worth more, this is why. And this person gets it. But then you start taking into consideration, okay, you get a raise or some performance bonus. So that's 5% more of what you were making the previous year. So if you were making 100,000, now you're making 105. But the next raise the next year, if you get a 5% raise, it's not 5% on your original salary. It's 5% on your new salary. So now it's 5% on 105. then it's fun. Then if you get whatever that is. So what this is saying is over 5 years, this is just an example of a combination. 3 consecutive years of raises, pretty healthy in this marketplace, and a promotion, an earned promotion over time. What this is saying is that just by negotiating, same job, same person doing the same thing. And this PA example is really good because when you're in a professional role, like a physician assistant or a clinician, or you get credentialed, like there is parity to a certain degree of what those roles. You can treat a patient or you can't. And there's some variance, but that's the idea. That's $23,000. By just having what may feel like an uncomfortable conversation 5 years before. It's real dollars. We know that you're worth that money. So I'll echo it again because I wish I had heard it 1,000 times. It's not personal. It's okay to do this. And being able to practice and expect it well, you will get the things that you deserve.
And the only way it ever, I will say, becomes personal is when you're unprofessional or when they are. And I don't expect you to be unprofessional. And if it's a good organization, I don't expect them to become unprofessional. A polite professional asks, the answer might be no. Still a polite professional ask, doesn't hurt. A polite professional ask, the answer might be yes. Yeah, doesn't hurt. But the key is how you ask. But now think about this from the employer perspective, right? Not only am I going to have to pay you an extra $23,000 because I round up, there's all the underlying costs of all the benefits and all that kind of good stuff that you don't see in that number. And oh, by the way, I need to make sure that you're within the range because I can't have you bump outside the range because otherwise I'm going to have to do 3% raise, which is high in the range. You're going to do that because you're seeing everybody else get 5%. So that's really the key. So those are the things that we're trying to think about on the employer side. That doesn't mean don't negotiate. You should. That's exactly right. It's expected. I was a hiring manager, it's expected. The ultimate thing, though, is polite, professional, and with data, meaning you've done your research at salary.com, Glassdoor, et cetera, now enables you to tell a story that can actually have weight behind it as opposed to, I just want more. Because we all just want more. I'd like to make 3 times what I make today. Else isn't going to pay me that for doing the same job.
Right.
Yeah, that's nice.
I think to your point, I think it's important. You think about this stuff a lot. You put that first slide with the career planning process. We don't expect our students to be experts. Being an expert in resume writing is probably the best use of time. Being an expert on these things, but these are practice skills. Doing research is a practice skill. If you can do your own or get help. Interviewing is a practice skill. How do I identify and answer questions? Negotiation is a skill that I think can and should be practiced. And we're trying to sort of illuminate some of these pieces. That's a value I think we can contribute working in workshops or conversations like this, but also one-on-one conversations with our career advisors, who are doing this. So should that be of interest to you, we welcome the opportunity to have those individual conversations, have the ability to practice in a safe space. And get feedback and have a great time doing it. And we do see some pretty nice returns.
Yes. It's always great when I get an email back.
Exactly.
So we've touched on this a handful of times, but we literally want to have a whole slide associated or dedicated to the fact that they are business transactions. And as much as you believe in the goal of the organization and that you love them, I mentioned I'm a double jumbo. I literally left the finance industry to come be a career advisor. It was not a financial decision. It was a life choice. It was a choice to have a greater impact on all of you and those that were before you and those that will come after you. So it was a business decision that I was making, even though I love the institution. Because I was choosing to change my life. Good, bad, and different. I think it was a good change. I'm happy about that. But ultimately, these are business transactions. You are engaging with an organization, whether they call themselves a business or not. I work for nonprofits. Yeah. But that's really the key. We want to make sure that we really kind of hammer that home. Because it has nothing to do with you as a person. It has nothing to do with them as an organization. It's just a conversation.
In many of the states, but Massachusetts, you're an employee as well. So if you were the idea is that there's no, unless you are, it might be a labor role, it may be It's a good example, Chris. Like a place where you might get contractually obligated, or part of a member of a union, a union-based job, or a federal job, where it is a little bit different. The idea is that there is a reality in most professional settings is that you're not under a contractual obligation. So the employer is not under a contractual obligation to keep you, and you're not under a contractual obligation to stay. So the idea is, I think it is somewhat, it can be thought of as impersonal. I think your team, the culture and the community you're in, but in that transaction piece, I think the idea is that you are like a business. How do I get the most out of this? How do I evaluate what I'm up to? What is the contribution? Because, and this I think happens a lot. Like, what do I owe this institution for blessing me with this job? I have absolutely felt that way in certain populations, maybe downward economy, trying to pivot careers or dissatisfied. But I think that is a not uncommon feeling. But we want to sort of move away from that place to more towards, I think, value. Is that if you're having a conversation and they are offering you a job, they want to hire you. And it is expensive and time consuming to recruit talent. Very expensive. The more time, the more jobs that are available, that number just rattles through human resources. Having been an executive recruiter, you start seeing those numbers. The amount of time and energy it takes to have a candidate that you want, you make an offer to. If they don't accept, you start thinking about it, it becomes a lot of money. So it's in their best interest, a lot of times, to find common ground. So that's, I think, where you start to think about, like, you're not at a disadvantage. I know it is that you're actually, there's parity in that conversation. We're sitting down as peers on an even level. We're ideally we'll communicate this out in some form to figure out how this is going to work.
And ultimately, the thing is that oh my God, I lost the plot. I don't know how did I lose the plot by saying their thing is, and then I went blank. So you were talking about business transaction, business and God. This is what happens.
It'll come back.
It will.
I'll just say a lot of words. It'll come back.
You can move.
So one thing I do want to mention is that when you're thinking about all those things that you can negotiate on, one of the things that's very, very, very critical is there's research on the company, industries, and the marketplace, but also it's recognizing it's doing research and analysis on yourself. So it's really important to start thinking about a job is not just salary. It may be the most important thing, but just think about the possibilities. It could be, how interested are you in the job, in the industry that it's in? What kind of skills are you going to leverage, and how great are those things? What kind of styles, what kind of people are you going to work for? What kind of boss is it? What kind of culture is that organization? Does it align with what your expectations are? Does it allow you, whatever your salary is or whatever your goals are, maybe something like, well, I want to make this much money because I want to retire or I want to buy a house. Or maybe I want to write a symphony, so I want flexibility to do these things. So taking into consideration your life, and your preferences, and your interests, and your goals and yourself, and remember all this is some of the things that we can help. Having that data at least recognized makes it easier to approach the negotiation process because you have an understanding of what your baseline is and how you can think about the negotiation, how you can adapt and how you can adjust your expectations based on what the offer is. I remember it.
So the thing that Matt was talking about, which made me think of this, was all about kind of this conversation between the two, and you kind of talking about the organization is figuring out work, it is figuring out what you're at, and the way that I always think about it is that you have veto power over this process just as much as the company. So it isn't until you apply and they say yes, you can interview. You both said yes. You have a first round interview. They say, would you like to come for a second round? You say yes. You have a third round interview. Great. They give you a job offer. You negotiate that job offer. They may counter negotiate back and forth. It isn't until both of you say yes that we then have an agreement. You can say no in all of those steps, but so can they. So it's just the way that the process works. So it isn't until we have full agreement the whole way through the process. And it's every step of the way. So you have more power in this conversation. And you're kind of leading towards the power piece. You have more power in this conversation than you may feel as you're going through it.
We have a question from the chat. One person says, I know that we've talked about negotiating things outside of salary, but one of the things that interested me on the list was negotiating 401k. I always thought that was fixed. How would you initiate that kind of conversation?
So in terms of 401k, your options are usually pretty fixed in terms of what you can invest in. Companies will many times have if a company has a match, meaning they put some money in, if you put some, there's a couple different ways the match can work, right? So bigger firms, it's going to be much harder to negotiate this than smaller firms. I will say that. So, but if there's a company match, typically the way it works is I will match 100% of the first 3% that you put in. So you put in $1, I put in $1. Put in a second $1, I put in a second $1. So you put in 1% of your salary, I put in 1% of your salary. You put in 2, I put in 2. You put in 3%, I put in 3%. You put in 4%, I put in 3%. I cap out at 3. The other common way is 50% of the first 6%. So you put in 1%, I put in half. 2, I put in 1, and so on and so forth. When you put in 6, I put in 3. That's where I max out. You put in 10, I still put in 3. And it isn't always 3%. Sometimes it's 5%. Sometimes it's 2%. It just depends on the organization and how many dollars. However, the dollars you put in are immediately yours. If you left the company after your second day and you put dollars in there, all those dollars are yours. If the company puts some of those dollars in, there's typically a graduated process for how long you need to be there for how you get those dollars. 2 ways they do it. One is a step. So that vesting schedule is typically 20% every 5 years. So if you leave after your first year, you get 20% of their dollars, all of your dollars. After 2 years, 40% of their dollars, all of your dollars. You always get all of your dollars. And so on and so forth until you get 5 years, and it's 100%. The other way is cliff vesting. So what that means is if you leave in the first year, 2 or 3, you get all of your dollars and none of theirs. After year 3, you get 100% of their dollars. The last thing I will say before I get to the negotiation part is that not every single dollar has to wait the 3 years or the 5 years. You have to wait the 3 years or the 5 years. So you just turned 3 years old, you got cliff vesting, you get 100% of their dollars. They put $1 in for you because you got paid last week, and you leave, they take that whole dollar. So now understanding that, one of the ways that you can negotiate might not be the match, but might be the schedule. So I don't want 5-year cliff, 3-year cliff, I want 2-year. I don't want 5-year cliff, can you do me the 20% vesting? So at least if I leave in 2 years, I'll get 40%. Again, smaller firms will potentially have that flexibility. Really big firms, not so much. So just kind of understanding, each organization can potentially negotiate different things.
And there are situations too, that depending on your level, we call it making you whole. So let's say you're trying to accept a new job, but you have money on the table. You haven't invested in your other organization. There are organizations that'll say, you have this much money in retirement that you are not going to get. Making you whole says, if you come here, we'll make sure that that dollar amount either is in salary or bonus or retirement. So you're not leaving, I guess it's supposed like time-earned dollars on the table. And you start, and as we're talking, for those of you that like 401ks, it's a retirement plan sponsored by your employer that they may or may not match to. Usually those dollars are tax-free going in. They're sort of Chris's sort of finance and go through all the details of the plan. But the idea is a huge benefit because the idea is that when you start thinking about nonprofits like Tufts salaries, I think, let's say they're fine. Let's say they're competitive for the industry. But one of the perks of working in higher ed a lot of times is that 403Bs or 401ks for nonprofits. It's a simple way to say it. But their matches are much higher. So they have 10% here.
So it's either 5 or 10 to piece.
Right.
The older you are, the bigger the match.
So, and I've been places as high as say 12 or 13. So they're putting that in anyway. If you put a certain amount, they're putting that in. Start thinking about the fact is that pool of money, even though your salary is the money you can spend, that pays your bills. But if you're thinking about your long-term investing that piece, it's just an interest in you're negotiating that, to Chris's point, those dollars. They do become meaningful. Like they become, the time value of money is just go in, it's kind of a big deal. Oh, and I think we sort of talked about the alternative things you think about. Last thing we'll sort of bring up is knowing your deal workers. Hugely important. Like, what are the things that if you hear or you don't get, you'll walk out? You know. So the idea is like Chris was talking about you being all of us being empowered to be based in that slot. Keep moving through the process, or we're going to move it off the island. So the idea is that you might hear like, you know, here's my baseline. This is the amount of money I think I'm worth with this thesis. Like it might be vesting schedule, could be reporting relationships, it could be location, it could be like that's when sort of that doing that due diligence. And everyone has it. Like so, just being prepared to understand is that there may be situations when you walk away. That's okay.
When should you start? After you get the job offer. So you shouldn't be like, hey, first phone call, nice to meet you, and not taking anything other than that. Because that pretty much ends the conversation right there. Because I don't know who you are, and I don't know why you would have bring that up at this point. So, or hey, so what's the salary? In like a networking information. Probably not the best place to begin the conversation. So you typically begin negotiation after you receive the job offer. You'll get an offer in writing. Companies should send that to you. Organizations should send that to you. Firms should send, whatever they describe themselves as. They should be sending that to you in writing. And then you get to begin the conversation. You've done some of your research hopefully ahead of time, so you know some of the things that are important to you, that are your walkaways. You also have done the research for that role, for that city, for that location, and figured out what the cost of living would be. You've done all that stuff so that you have an idea. So when they present you with a number, you aren't suddenly saying, what? I got to start this. So your preparation happens before before the job offer. Your negotiation happens after the job offer is received. That makes sense. So then you're doing your prep ahead of time.
Question from the chat. Is salary negotiation always done via email, or is it better to do a phone call?
That's our next slide. So if you want to hold that thought for 30 seconds.
Sure.
I don't know if there was anything else that I missed here.
I think you mentioned before, and I like that, is that when you talk about when you receive an offer, how you receive that, like I would say negotiations start when you have it in writing. Like otherwise it's just a conversation. Like there's nothing to measure against. So it's sort of like a unbinding starting agreement, or at least a conversation starting. But I think different organizations write different levels of detail into their offers. That's important to recognize because you need the information that you need to make that decision. So it's not impolite to sort of ask for those people. So you may have a situation where like, here's the salary and here's a start date. It can be as simple as that. We're glad to have you. Here's the salary, here's the start date, here's the location. But there's nothing about benefits, matching, details, reporting relationships. Like, so you can have 4 lines of an offer in an email. You can also have several pages and have that person vote. But this is what's important to understand is that you should be asking for what you need. Like if you want, like, if you're being encouraged to make a decision on a timeline that doesn't work through that information, go. This isn't a race. Like this is your time. And I'll give you one more piece. Is if you ever get a situation, this comes up every once in a while. If you have an organization that makes you an offer and they want a same day or the next day response, I'm not saying never, but as close to never as humanly possible, do not accept an offer. Probably not.
When I got my offer from Tufts, I really wanted the job. I was so excited. I literally got the phone call. I was at a track meet. I was working it. And Gene, old boss, said, hey, so you want to accept it? I was like, I'll talk to you on Monday. It's Friday. I wanted the job. I knew I wanted the job. I literally, like, in the middle of the track meet, called my wife. I was like, got a job. And I'm so excited, but I was not accepting that job without having some time to think of it. Some time to kind of take it in. So I did give her a reference saying it's probably going to be a good conversation on Monday, but I'll talk to you then. And you talk to Molly. So that was kind of the idea.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
then we back time to contribute and make the next time contribute on it. I would schedule for those times and other things, so third simple example.
Well, they're trying to move through the process rapidly, right? So their goal is to, nobody wants to extend an interview process too long, especially in a really strong job market. I know that we've seen some softness in certain spaces, but there are still way more jobs than there are people filling those jobs, just available right now. So they don't want to say, oh, by the time it takes me 3 months to fill this job, you've already taken it, lost you. So I am trying to move rapidly, but in that situation, no, I've got class, which is my priority as a student. I've got some other things. Can we finish out? Or here are my free times in the next 3 or 4 days. You can let them know that, but that's the reason why they're trying to move you pretty quick. But when you get to end game, you can open things up a little bit. We did also mention, so avoid giving the first salary number. Matt and I were talking about that yesterday. Ultimately, I'm of the mind that it's the first acknowledged number that matters. So, because if I say to Matt, I want to pay $50,000, and Matt says, great, can you just send me the offer? Did he acknowledge that number? No. If I say, Matt, I want to pay $50,000, like $50,000, now I've seen some other numbers. Now we're negotiating. If I say, Matt, I want to pay $50,000, and Matt says, oh, well, hang on a minute. I think what I'm seeing, 90 is really the right answer. Oh, well, 90 feels a little bit high. Now we're negotiating. So it's the first number that the other party acknowledges. So just kind of keep that in mind.
I think it's really, I hadn't thought about that way. How Chris has framed it, but it's really interesting because there are situations you may be applying for jobs where it says it asks you for a salary range before you even get into the interview. I think typical baseline is like don't give out a number. If you put ASCII text in it, just put negotiable and move on from there. Because it is impossible to negotiate in good faith if one party has more information. Impossible. Like you can't. So because if you think the marketplace is saying you're worth 85, that seems like a great number, but they're willing to pay 120 and they have a budgeted range for that. You need to know their expectations. That is just as important. So that's where I think there's some. Otherwise, they'll pay you the low number. But if you don't think you're getting a deal, you are getting a steal, and they're going to get a huge deal. So I think recognizing that aspect becomes pretty important. Is that we get into that. But if you do give it, that's something you can have a conversation with us, or if you want to think about a range. You don't have to do this by yourself. Right? And one thing I'll word this last that I say, when I was applying for this job, I was accepted an offer, and my wife and I were in Quebec City, and I was super excited. I wanted this job really badly, but this was just a fit for me. And we're in a cafe, like north of the city, and I'm emotional. Like I'm feeling this. Jobs are emotional, careers are emotional. Like you feel like I want to accept this, I want to move forward. But I think what I liked about the situation is that my partner was very grounded in that process. Like we could have a dialogue and talk about what this means, or like how do I want to write we'll talk about sort of how you negotiate. I was initially writing an email. What that context of that email was going to be. So that was really helpful because my urge was to like wrap this up. Like to Chris's point, I want this thing. But the reality is that I think spending a little time stepping back and how to be a little more objective, I think gives you a lot more.
Which brings us to Zoom question. How do you reach out? In person? Over the phone? Via email? Just look at the time, we're 12:51. So you want to flip to the next slide, and we'll let them read for a moment, and then we'll talk about perspectives here.
Yeah.
So we talked about the fact that going back to our Joan and Paula, I think it was, if I remember correctly. So we've got somebody who's offered $85,000. They've done their research, and they think that 90 makes more sense. They're happy with the benefits package, so they're not going to go into that realm. So ultimately, they are now going to reach out to the employer and ask for more money, which I think is on the next slide, right? So there's their ask. We're going to give you a moment, let you read that.
do you think?
So what's your reaction to that if you read that email?
Okay.
Well, like, this is not bad, but this.
So I will tell you that as an employer, we're always going to say that. Even if my budget goes up to $455,000, I'm going to be like, yeah, let me get back. I'm never going to answer in the call just like you're not going to answer the call as manager. Go, right? So the employer response, totally fine. I mean, granted, that's the way that I would email the response.
Typically, in a situation like this, I would just say, you're probably going to negotiate less likely with your future boss, and more likely with a recruiter or someone in human resource. To Chris's point, there's a go-between. So there's somebody who's navigating and be the intermediary in this process. Right?
Also, like, I call you later today. I feel like when it's on the phone, you have less time to develop things. So, like when you're in the flow of the conversation, it gets harder to say no.
But you can use the exact same technique. Let me get a think about that. Say I wanted the job, Matt wanted the job. We both said we need to go talk to a significant other in our cases. But you can say I need to go talk to a professor, career center, family member, parent, guardian, friend, whoever. You don't even need to give a name. You need to say I need to talk with some folks in my space.
On Zoom, they're not hearing everyone, so if you have a question, you might be doing it.
Sure, we'll do.
Yeah, I had a follow-up question. So I understand that, like, once you're in that phase, like you open more opportunities, like you can negotiate. But like, is there ever a bad time should like speak things wrong? Or like, I guess my main concern is like, what if they offer you something, you're still thinking about it? Like, is it possible that because you like didn't reply like quickly that they just give you something else?
Typically, no, because we don't make offers that are like extra. So we don't say, oh, I'm going to offer 10 people, right, and the first three that say yes, get it. So we only offer to the number of seats that we have because nobody can recruit that way. So now that doesn't mean you can drag your feet forever, but you can put some time between these decisions. So as the employer, when I read that, I think, I don't even remember you experience on kids. What? Like, you want more money? Like, I give you a great offer. That's what I'm.
And for those of you on Zoom right now, the idea was, should you worry about timing and expediting your response to an initial offer? And that's what Chris's response.
Sorry, forgot about that, Zoom folks. So ultimately, as somebody just reading this, I get to determine your tone. Are you professional? Are you a butthead? Am I upset right now? I don't know. You don't know. I get to decide. And again, I don't remember who you are. Like, yeah, I talked to a bunch of people in this job. And you say you have prior experience? Come on, your experience was kind of like not great. And so all that could be what I'm thinking. You have no idea. Do you want to try it again? This time as a human?
Yeah, sure. Chris, I really appreciate this offer. This is fantastic. I couldn't be more excited to work here. But looking at the conditions, I think my 5 years of experience working in this critical care center, along with being an ENT, working with this patient population, but also being interested in pediatric emergency medicine use cases, and my desire that aligns well with the goals of this organization, the type of specific work you're doing with these patients. I think it makes me a desirable candidate, and I'd like you, but I think, would you consider so range between 95 or 100,000?
Which is better? Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, the second was Zoom, folks. The second was the answer, right? So having that human interaction, what Matt has done is he's done the sandwich. So he did the I want more money on my love you bread, right? This is amazing, great opportunity. Here's all my credentials and why I want more money. And I've actually been able to be very specific about those examples versus prior experience in orthopedics, which I have to try to remember. He's now laid out for me. And then he says, this is amazing, and I am so excited, and I'm going to bring all of these things to your organization, which we are totally aligned. Can you give me an extra few grand? And oh, by the way, if we're on the phone, or like on Zoom, he can see my face. Am I smiling? Am I shaking? Am I giving him the look? And then when I react and say, yeah, you make a lot of good points. Let me go check and see what I can do for you. He now has somebody who might be excited about trying to get him more money because we're like, this person's we need to land them. As opposed to, who is this annoying person that just sent me an email asking for more money? Now I've got a human. So that phone call or Zoom call is a million times more effective because you have a human in front of you and you can then read my reaction and you can adjust. If I can say, well, you know, the EMT thing really don't need. You'd be like, oh, well, when I was talking with Mary and whatever, she was very excited about the fact that I was EMT. Oh, I wasn't aware of that. I didn't have that conversation with Mary. Let me check in. Now, obviously, you're going to tell the truth, right? So therefore, when I go check with Mary, Mary's going to be like, oh, yeah, totally. Like, that's an important thing. Whereas if I read it maybe in your letter, I'm like, we don't need that. Because I don't know, but it's that human conversation which enables you to then react. And again, I'm going to tell you I need to go talk to people. I'm going to call you up and say, hey, Matt, 100 grand. Let's go. And you're going to say,
yes. Yes.
I mean, that's pretty much it. Or, well, he's probably going to say, I'm going to touch my wife. But in 24 hours,
yeah. So you set up a range. And when if they come back with a number either in your range, the negotiation on salary is done. So that's the idea, is that if they meet the expectation that you've set, you're done with that. But I will want to go back to one thing around messaging, is that none of this is directive or prescriptive. These are examples of best practices and ideas. So every case is a little bit different because there may be times when email is preferred by the organization. There might be some time where you may be a non-native speaker and you feel more comfortable doing it in written form. So the idea is that we're not saying things are better than the other. We'll say, writing has its purposes for a variety of reasons. Zoom in person, nonverbal cues. So you have flexibility, and I think that's great to know. And then again, some things that we can help with.
So ultimately, yes, we come back with 1 of 3 answers. One answer is yes, we can do whatever you've asked. You're pretty much like, okay, I'm feeling very comfortable about this. Can you send me the offer in writing? Once I review it, I'll give you my final yes. So you've kind of conditionally accepted, but you got to make sure the writing says what it says. What I've said over verbally. Now it's written. Now you can sign the paperwork.
So then you're in a situation where, well, what do we do if they want to counter? So we can't meet your expectations, but either how about this, or what about this alternative condition? In this case, and I agree with this, you need to know your bottom line salary. You need to know your basic level number that's going to meet the expectations. So the idea is that, what is it worth to you? But then the idea is, we've had a chance to discuss this. We're not able to do 90,000, which is the preferred range. We can do 88.5. All right, that's outside of what your expectations were. Is that good enough? Based on the other qualities of that job. And then you can either sit around I'd like to think about it, or yeah, that meets my expectations.
Well, ultimately, can I get the offer writing so that I can review it? Talk with a couple folks, and we'll talk again. And then the last one is a straight up no.
Yeah.
So in this situation, it's like there's not really much that we can do. So now we start to say the best we can do is maybe, this is you coming back. This is your counter.
Right, but this is the conditional piece. It's that we can't offer you this much money. We can offer you more vacation, or we can offer you a bump, or we can just. So the idea is that this is when you're sort of weighing the attributes of a job. It's never one thing. It's all of these different pieces. It's who, what, where, and how all the time. And you might say, well, that works for me because I do care about flexibility. And an extra week that's going to be paid for me allows me to go do something else or go be part of this. So I think, this is where understanding yourself wholly allows you to do this. Because I think the preparation matters because you don't want to be in your feelings, trying to understand yourself and your needs before you go into this process. And then the final point was saying that, then there's just a no. Like this doesn't work for us. Like, this isn't going to, and you can decline politely.
Yeah. Just because somebody offers you a job, remember, you have veto power. It says it on this piece of paper that I wrote. I remember. You have veto power, and you can say no. Just the same way the employer can say, sorry, we can't do that.
just quickly, this is just a representative. It's that maybe you have competing offers. This is just a straw man example, representative example of how could you look at two competing offers by certain price? It's just one, it's a conceptual way to look at it. So, you might be going like, oh, I have a different salary offer, different bonus. I do think seeing things sometimes in writing or writing it down yourself, visualizing it, working it through somebody else can be helpful because you're not sort of testing your gut. You're like, well, what's going to pay for my transportation expenses? But I definitely got way more sick time to people to care about these things. So the offset salary, I'm actually going to get more in benefits than I want. So this is just about, can you see? You can do this for an individual job as well.
Key thing. Do your research beforehand, even though you're not going to negotiate until after you get the job offer. This is a learned skill. Matt said it, and you can't repeat it enough times. Practice is how you get good at a learned skill. So for those of you that can hit a tennis ball or hit a baseball with a tennis racket or a baseball bat or something like that, that is a learned skill. You practice and you got better at it. So those of you that can run fast, you practice and you got better at it. Those of you that can negotiate well, you practice and got better at it. So ultimately, this is what, the first in a series, Malika?
Yes.
So we have an event tonight too. Interviewing with Malika and Robin, navigating uncertainties, working abroad. From here to there is going to be one of our podcasts. We've got some other online events happening beyond Tufts series. So the last thing I do want to say is, while we have a series of different events coming up, you're more than welcome, and I encourage you to attend those. You are also more than welcome to schedule time with us. So to have some of these conversations. Handshake has our up-to-the-moment calendars. We are always happy to talk. So that will enable you to kind of sit down and have some of these pre-conversations as you're starting to figure things out. And then when you get to the negotiation point, we can also have those kind of practice conversations as well. So this is kind of to get you to understand the lay of the land, but not necessarily the all and all. As Matt touched on for here.